2 days before his wedding, she was gone. Not a note, not a voicemail, not even the courtesy of a lie, just an empty closet, a missing passport, and a silence so loud it rang in his ears for months. And the worst part? It wasn't just her. It was Marcus, his best friend since they were 12 years old, the man who gave a toast at their engagement party, the same man who looked him dead in the eyes and said, "She's the one, bro. Don't let her go." He didn't let her go. She left with him. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Please like, share, and subscribe. Ethan Cole was 31 years old, the kind of man people described as having everything: a company worth more than most people could count, a penthouse that touched the clouds, and a face that stopped conversations. But none of that meant anything when you're standing in a church doorway in a suit that cost $10,000, watching your guests slowly realize the bride isn't coming. He smiled through it. That was the cruelest part. He smiled, shook hands, accepted the quiet apologies, thanked the caterers, and then he went home, sat on the floor of that silent apartment, and didn't move until morning. After that day, Ethan stopped believing in people. Not dramatically, not with tears or outbursts. He just quietly closed every door inside himself and decided, some rooms aren't meant to be reopened. 2 years passed. He built more, felt less, dated women who asked for nothing because he offered nothing. It worked, until it didn't. Until one Thursday night in November, when the rain came down like the sky had something to say. And he found her, sitting outside a closed cafe, soaking wet, with her shoes in her hands and absolutely nowhere to go. She didn't know who he was. She didn't care. She looked up at him with eyes that had clearly seen their own kind of damage and said, "Don't look at me like that. I'm fine." She was not fine. Neither was he. And somehow, in the most unexpected, completely inconvenient, quietly devastating way, they began to fix each other. But just when Ethan finally exhaled, or just when he remembered what it felt like to want a future again, she came back. And this time, she didn't come quietly. This is not a love story, at least not the kind you're expecting. This is the story of a man who had everything the world calls success and lost the one thing money could never replace, and a woman who had nothing left to lose, except her heart, in which she'd already locked away and swallowed the key. Ethan Cole built empires before 40. He negotiated deals in rooms where nations made decisions. He owned floors of buildings in cities that never sleep. But the night his world cracked open, it wasn't in a boardroom. It was in a church, in silence, in a suit he never wore again. And Mara? She's a different kind of broken. The quiet kind. The kind that wakes up every morning, makes coffee, smiles at strangers, and carries a weight nobody ever thinks to ask about. Love had taught her one lesson, early and hard, that the people who stay the longest always leave the deepest marks. So here they are. Two people who decided, separately, painfully, privately, that they were done. Done hoping. Done trusting. Done reaching for something that kept burning their hands. And then life, with absolutely no respect for either of their decisions, put them in the same rain, on the same night, at the exact moment they were both running out of reasons to keep going alone. What happens next will move you. Some of it will sting. Some of it will feel dangerously familiar. Because buried underneath the wealth and the wounds and the walls they've both built is something neither of them planned for. Something real. But the past doesn't retire quietly. It waits. It watches. And when you finally find your peace, it comes back dressed in everything you once loved. Stay with me, because this story only gets deeper. There are wounds that don't bleed. You can't see them. You can't point to them. But they change the shape of a person. quietly, completely, forever. Ethan Cole knew exactly what that felt like. And he was the kind of man the world admired from a distance, controlled, composed, the sort of billionaire who walked into rooms and made people sit straighter without saying a single word. He'd built his empire the hard way, early mornings, brutal decisions, years of grinding when everyone around him was sleeping. And through all of it, through every sacrifice and every climb, he held on to two people, just two, his fiancée, Layla, and his best friend, Marcus. They were his constants, his proof that success didn't have to mean loneliness, that even a man like him, driven, guarded, always 3 steps ahead, could still have something soft to come home to. He trusted them the way you trust the ground beneath your feet, without thinking, without questioning, because some things you just believe in. And 2 days before the wedding, they were gone. No conversation, no confrontation, no moment where he could look either of them in the eye and ask why. Just a letter, 3 lines. Layla's handwriting, slightly rushed, like even she couldn't bear to slow down and face what she was doing. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen like this." That was it. No explanation for the years, no apology big enough for the silence that followed, no acknowledgement of what it cost him to stand in that apartment, letter in hand, wedding flowers still being arranged downstairs, and understand, all at once, that the two people he loved most had chosen each other. Over him. He didn't scream, didn't throw anything, didn't call a single person. He folded the letter, put it in his jacket pocket, walked to the window, and stood there, watching the city move like nothing had happened, until the sun went down. That night buried something inside Ethan Cole that he never went looking for again. Not grief, not anger, trust. He dismantled it quietly, deliberately, brick by brick. And in its place, he built walls so smooth and so high that even he forgot what was on the other side. He stopped feeling, stopped reaching, stopped believing that anyone was truly worth the risk. And for 2 years, it worked, until the night it didn't. Some heartbreaks announce themselves. They arrive loud and violent, doors slamming, voices cracking, tears that fall before you even understand why. Those ones hurt, but at least you know the exact moment everything changed. Mara's wasn't like that. Mara's heartbreak was the other kind, the slow kind, and the kind that sneaks up on you dressed as normal life, as unanswered texts, as dinners eaten in silence, as a hand that used to reach for yours that slowly, gradually stopped reaching. It didn't explode. It faded. Like a photograph left too long in the sun, the colors don't vanish all at once. They just bleed out quietly, day by day, until one morning you pick it up and realize you can barely make out the faces anymore. That's what Daniel did to her. Not with cruelty, not with drama. He simply stopped choosing her. Stopped showing up in the small ways that matter more than any grand gesture ever could. Stopped looking at her like she was someone worth looking at. And Mara, being Mara, patient, gentle, always willing to give the benefit of the doubt, she waited, she adjusted, she made herself smaller, quieter, easier to love. She told herself it was a season, that all relationships had winters, but this winter never ended, until one Tuesday, without ceremony, without even the dignity of a real conversation, he was just gone. Not gone from the apartment immediately, but gone from her, present in body, completely absent in every way that mattered. She left before he could make it official, and now here she sat. A small cafe on Alderton Street, the kind of place that felt permanently stuck in late autumn. Warm lighting, wooden tables worn soft at the edges, the smell of ground coffee and something baked hours ago still clinging to the air. It was a Thursday evening in November. Rain tapped steadily against the glass like it had something patient to say. Mara sat by the window with both hands wrapped around her mug, not because she was cold, but because she needed something solid to hold on to. The coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago. She hadn't moved. Around her, people laughed, typed, leaned across tables toward each other. The whole world was mid-sentence, and she was somewhere between the end of one story and the terrifying blank page of the next. She wasn't crying. She was past crying. She'd arrived at that quieter, hollower place on the other side of tears, where you just sit and breathe and wonder how you ended up here. She stared out at the rain and thought about nothing and everything all at once, and then the door opened. Cold air rushed in first, then footsteps, then presence, the kind that shifts a room without trying. She didn't look up immediately. She had no reason to, but something made her. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way the room seemed to recalibrate around him. Subtle, almost imperceptible. The way a space adjusts when something significant enters it. She looked up, and across the warmth of that quiet cafe, through the soft blur of a rainy Thursday evening, Ethan Cole looked back. Neither of them smiled, neither of them spoke, but something passed between them in that silence. Something neither of them had a name for yet. Quiet and fragile and terrifyingly alive. Like the first note of a song you've never heard before, but somehow already know. Nobody tells you that healing has a sound. It isn't music. It isn't laughter. It isn't anything dramatic or cinematic or easy to describe. Sometimes it sounds exactly like rain against a window and two people talking in the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. And the cafe was nearly empty by the time Ethan sat down. The evening crowd had thinned to just a few. A man in the corner nursing an espresso, a woman typing without looking up, and Mara, still by the window, still holding a mug that had long stopped being warm. He almost didn't approach her. That was the thing about Ethan Cole. He had spent 2 years mastering the art of not approaching, of keeping distance, of moving through spaces and people without leaving fingerprints. It was a skill he'd built deliberately, maintained carefully, and wore like armor every single day. But something about her stillness stopped him. Not sadness exactly. Something quieter than that. The way she sat, present but unreachable, like a person who had learned to exist entirely inside herself. He recognized it the way you recognize your own handwriting. "Is this seat taken?" She looked up. No performance in her eyes, no rehearsed smile, just honest, tired, human eyes that assessed him once and told the truth immediately. No. One word. And he sat down. What followed wasn't a conversation either of them could have planned. It began carefully, the weather, the cafe, small observations exchanged like people testing ice before stepping onto it. But pain has a way of dissolving small talk faster than anything else, because when two people are both carrying something heavy, eventually the weight shows. And when it does, pretending becomes exhausting. So they stopped pretending. Ethan said something honest, quietly, almost accidentally, and instead of the polite deflection he expected, Mara met it with something equally real. No performance, no filter, just truth, offered simply, and the way you hand someone something fragile and trust them not to drop it. He couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to him like that, like he was just a person, not a name, not a net worth, not a reputation walking around in an expensive coat, just a man, sitting in the rain, talking. And Mara, for the first time in longer than she could honestly measure, felt the muscles in her face do something she hadn't asked them to do. She smiled. Not the polished, everything is fine smile she offered the world every morning. A real one. Small and a little surprised, like it caught even her off guard. Ethan saw it, and something moved in his chest. Quiet, unexpected, and absolutely terrifying, because he felt it. After 2 years of carefully feeling nothing, he felt something, and neither of them said a word about it. Yet they didn't have to. The second time they met, neither of them admitted it wasn't an accident. The same cafe, the same corner table, the same rain, as though November had made a personal decision to keep showing up for them. Ethan told himself he was there for the coffee. Mara told herself she simply liked the lighting. They were both lying. And somewhere between the first cup and the second, between the careful silences and the sentences that kept going longer than either of them intended, something began to grow. Not loudly, not in a way either of them could point to and say there, that's where it started, but the way all real things grow, slowly, quietly, in the spaces between what's said and what's meant. Days passed, then weeks, and they fell into a rhythm that had no name and no label and absolutely no plan. And somehow that made it feel more real than anything structured ever could. Tuesday evenings, the occasional Sunday morning walk when the city was still half asleep and the streets belonged to nobody. Text messages that started as brief and became long without either of them noticing the shift. Ethan started paying attention to her in ways he hadn't paid attention to anyone in years. The way she laughed, not immediately, never on cue, but when something genuinely caught her off guard, it arrived fully, warm and unguarded, like she forgot for a moment to protect herself. The way she listened, not waiting for her turn to speak, but actually receiving what he said, turning it over, responding to the real thing underneath the words. Nobody listened to Ethan Cole like that. People heard his name and decided in advance what he meant. Mara heard him, and Mara, for her part, felt something loosening inside herself, slowly, cautiously, the way a fist unclenches after holding on too long. She wasn't ready to call it trust. That word still carried too much history, too much scar tissue. But she was willing. She was showing up. And for someone who had spent months convincing herself that showing up for anyone was a risk she'd never take again, willing was everything. She started returning his messages before she talked herself out of it. Started saying yes to the walks instead of manufacturing reasons to stay home. Started letting herself enjoy his company without immediately bracing for the moment it would be taken away. And Ethan, composed, controlled, to armored Ethan, stood one morning at his penthouse window watching the city wake up, coffee in hand, and caught himself thinking about her. Not strategically, not cautiously, just her. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking hard. The way she said his name like it was just a name and not a headline. Something settled in his chest, unfamiliar but not unwelcome. And the thought arrived quietly, without announcement. Maybe this is something worth not running from. He had rehearsed that moment 1,000 times. In the early months after she left, when the silence of his apartment felt physical, like something pressing against his ribs, he had imagined what he would say if she ever came back. He'd constructed entire conversations in his head. Some versions were cold. Some were devastating. Some were quiet and surgical, designed to make her understand, without raising his voice, exactly what she had cost him. But the mind prepares for a lot of things that the body still isn't ready for. Ethan walked into his office on a Tuesday morning in February, coffee in hand, mind already 3 meetings ahead, and stopped. She was sitting in the chair across from his desk, Layla, 3 years older, thinner than he remembered, dressed carefully, like she'd thought hard about what to wear, what version of herself to present. Her hands were folded in her lap with the rehearsed stillness of someone working very hard not to appear nervous. She was failing. The air in the room changed immediately. His assistant hovered near the door with wide, apologetic eyes. She tried to clearly, but Layla had always known how to get into rooms she wasn't invited into. Ethan didn't speak. He set his coffee down slowly, walked to his side of the desk, sat, and looked at her the way a man looks at something that once had enormous power over him and now simply doesn't. She broke first. Of course she did. I made a mistake. Her voice cracked on the last word. Real tears, or close enough to real that the difference didn't matter. She talked, and he let her talk, because cutting her off would have required more emotional energy than she deserved. She talked about Marcus, how it fell apart within a year, how she'd been fooling herself, how she spent every month since trying to outrun the guilt and failing. See how she'd lost the life she'd abandoned him for, and was now standing in the wreckage of a decision she couldn't take back. I still love you, Ethan. The room was completely silent when she said it. He looked at her for a long moment, not with anger, not with pain, with something far more final than either, with the calm recognition of a man who had already grieved this completely and had nothing left to reopen. I don't, he said. 2 words, no raised voice, no cruelty in the delivery, just the flat, unambiguous truth of a door that had been closed, locked, and quietly walled over from the inside. She blinked. Whatever response she'd prepared, whatever she'd hoped would flicker across his face, wasn't there. And that absence undid her more than anger ever could have. She was still gathering herself when the office door opened. Mara appeared briefly in the doorway. She hadn't known, couldn't have known, dropping off something she'd picked up for him, mid-laugh at something her own phone had just shown her. Easy, warm, entirely herself. She looked up, clocked the atmosphere immediately, offered a quiet, "Sorry, I'll come back," and moved to leave. But it was too late. Layla had already seen her, and the entire temperature of the room shifted in a single breath. Something moved across Layla's face, fast and involuntary, the way true feelings surface before the mind can dress them up. It wasn't grief anymore. Grief had been sitting in that chair, hands folded, rehearsed, and carefully presented. This was something rawer. Her eyes tracked Mara to the door, then came back to Ethan. And in that moment, reading him, reading the room, reading the easy way that woman had walked in without knocking, Layla understood something that changed everything about why she was there. He had moved on. And the realization didn't break her open with remorse. It ignited her, because Layla had come here believing she was reclaiming something she'd lost. But watching Ethan's eyes move instinctively toward the door Mara had just walked through, she understood she wasn't reclaiming anything. She was losing, still, to someone else, in real time. This was no longer about regret. It never really was. It was about the one thing Layla had never learned to tolerate. Someone else having what she decided she wanted. Jealousy is a quiet arsonist. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with noise or declaration. It simply finds the corners of a life that matter most and starts a small, careful fire. Layla was methodical about it. That was the part that made it dangerous. She didn't storm in, didn't make scenes. She was too intelligent for that, too practiced in the art of appearing reasonable while dismantling things from the inside. She knew exactly which threads to pull and how gently to pull them, so that when everything unraveled, no one could trace it back to her hands. It started with a photograph. Mara, captured from a distance, at an angle, in a moment stripped entirely of its context, standing close to a man outside her workplace. The kind of image that means nothing to anyone who knows the full story. The kind that means everything to anyone who doesn't. Then a message. Forwarded to Ethan through a third party. Anonymous, see conveniently timed, a screenshot of a conversation that looked real enough to pause at, but felt wrong in ways that were difficult to immediately articulate. Then whispers. The quiet, corrosive kind that travel through social circles and boardroom hallways faster than any truth ever manages to move. Mara, cheating. Someone else. Ethan received the photograph on a Wednesday afternoon. He sat with it for a long time. And here is the part that matters. Here is the part that cuts deepest. He didn't believe it. Not instinctively. Not in the place where he actually knew Mara, where he had watched her show up honestly every single day without performance or pretense. In that place, something steady and certain said, "This isn't her." But fear doesn't live in the place where you know things. Well, fear lives somewhere older and deeper, in the part of a person that was built by experience, shaped by damage, conditioned by a specific Tuesday morning 3 years ago when he thought he knew someone completely and discovered he didn't know them at all. That fear came back now, quietly, uninvited, not screaming, just present, sitting at the edge of his certainty and asking one devastating question: what if you're wrong again? Mara saw it the moment she walked into the room. She knew his face by now, the real one, underneath the composure he wore for the rest of the world. She could read the particular stillness that meant something was moving underneath the surface. She'd learned it slowly, across months of Tuesday evenings and Sunday morning streets, and conversations that went longer than either of them planned. She looked at him, and then at the phone in his hand, and she understood immediately what had happened and exactly where it had come from. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't perform outrage or dissolve into desperate reassurances. She simply stood in front of him, steady, open, nothing hidden, and said what was true. "I would never do that to you." A breath of silence. I know what betrayal feels like. No elaboration, no evidence presented. Just that, said quietly, with the weight of someone who meant every syllable down to the bone. And something broke open in Ethan's chest. Not painfully, but the way a window breaks open in a sealed room, letting air in for the first time in years. Because she wasn't asking him to forget his past. She was simply standing in front of it, unflinching, refusing to let it speak for her. He made a choice, not the choice that fear recommended, not the one that old wounds made feel safer. The harder one, the one that required him to decide, consciously and completely, that Mara had earned more than his damage. He investigated quietly, quickly, with the precision of a man who had built an empire on reading situations clearly when his emotions weren't involved. And the truth surfaced fast, because fabricated things always carry their own contradictions if you know where to look. The photograph, the message, the whispers, all roads led back to one origin. He handled it without drama, without public confrontation. He simply closed every door Layla had used to enter his life and made absolutely certain none of them would open again. And then he went to Mara, not with an apology that performed guilt, with the simple, unguarded truth that he had hesitated, that fear had visited him, and that he had chosen her anyway. Because choosing someone when it's easy means nothing. It's choosing them when fear says otherwise. That means everything. Some endings don't arrive with thunder. They arrive quietly, with clarity, with the kind of calm that only comes from a person who has finally, completely let go. Layla found him one last time, not in his office, not through intermediaries or staged photographs or whispered rumors moving through rooms she wasn't in person, outside the restaurant where he just had dinner, standing on the pavement in the cold, her breath visible in the night air, her composure thinner than it had ever been. Whatever armor she'd worn through every previous encounter had worn through at last. What stood in front of him now was something closer to the truth of her, stripped of strategy, stripped of performance, just a woman facing the full weight of a decision she'd made 3 years ago and had never stopped paying for. She called his name. He stopped, turned, looked at her with eyes that held no malice and no longing, just a steady, settled recognition. She began to speak. Something about time, about growth, about how people change, and how what they had was rare, and how she understood now what she'd thrown away. The words were genuine, probably. The regret was real, perhaps. None of that was the question. Ethan let her finish. He didn't interrupt, didn't cross his arms, or harden his jaw, or perform the coldness that a lesser version of himself might have reached for. He simply stood there, present and still. Aaron gave her the respect of actually listening. And when she was done, when the words had run out, and the silence between them filled with everything that couldn't be recovered, he spoke. I loved you once. Simple, honest, said without bitterness, because bitterness would have meant she still had territory inside him, and she didn't. Not anymore. But you taught me something important. She searched his face, whatever she hoped to find there. Hesitation, softness, the ghost of something salvageable, wasn't there. What? She asked, her voice barely above the sound of the street. He held her gaze, steady, unhurried, the kind of eye contact that doesn't need volume to carry weight. That love without trust isn't love at all. Not a verdict delivered in anger. Not a wound dressed up as wisdom. Just the truth, clean and final, the way only things that have been fully processed can be. He had lived inside that lesson for 3 years, had been rebuilt by it, had carried it into every guarded interaction and every carefully maintained distance. Until one rainy Thursday evening in November, it had led him somewhere he hadn't expected, to someone who showed him the other side of that truth. That love with trust, real trust, chosen consciously, extended to someone who had earned it honestly, was the only version worth having. He held Layla's gaze one last moment, not unkindly, but with the unmistakable finality of a man who has closed a chapter so completely that revisiting it isn't even tempting. Then he turned, and there was Mara. She had waited a few steps back, giving him space, the way she always did, never crowding, never demanding, and always trusting him to find his way back. She stood with her coat pulled close against the cold, watching him with those honest eyes that had never once tried to be anything other than exactly what they were. He walked to her, not quickly, not dramatically, just directly, with the easy certainty of a man who knows exactly where he belongs and has stopped being afraid of it. She looked up at him, read his face, and something in her shoulders released. That subtle, almost invisible tension she still carried sometimes, the residue of old pain that hadn't fully dissolved yet. He reached out, took her hand. She let him, and they walked, together, into the ordinary, extraordinary evening. No grand declaration, no cinematic resolution, just two people who had been broken in different ways by different people choosing, quietly, deliberately, and with full knowledge of the risk, to trust again. This time, he didn't choose fear. He chose her. And for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, choosing felt like freedom. If this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe and tell me in the comments. Would you forgive someone who betrayed you like that? Or walk away forever because sometimes the past doesn't come back to fix things. It comes back to test if you've truly moved on.